when I first arrived, the process was to inflation index the 46 settlement, and that would take the $15,000 a year and make it $650,000 a year.
But that would never have been enough, understanding the history and the context.
No. So that was the starting point. That was what they were trying to get past Treasury to start with. It was ridiculous now when you look at where we got to, but that was how bad it was.
Welcome, and thank you for participating in this interview, which is an opportunity to texture the stories that go with the settlement period, but also reflections. 30 years since the settlement, we now have an opportunity to reflect on what happened and what were the kind of key learnings and what might that offer in terms of insights for young people looking at our journey saying, wow, how did we do that? So we're really pleased that you can participate. Can I just ask you, Sandra, maybe to introduce yourself a little bit so that listeners know the role you played during the settlement period?
Ko Sandra Thomas tēnei, ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi. I grew up in Te Awamutu, and then I moved to New Plymouth. I didn't know anything about Raupatu at any point in my childhood until I got to university. But I felt quite connected to my house on Rewe Street. So when I found out all this history, it really resonated with me that I was in the dark for a long, long time. So it was really quite a personal and geographical thing for me when I got to work on the claim. So I was lucky in 1990 that the Treaty of Waitangi Policy Unit had been set up, and the national government came in, and Doug Graham was the minister, and Tainui had its court cases, and the job went to the Treaty of Waitangi Policy Unit to try and support Doug Graham in building some machinery to address the challenges that Tainui had put on the table.
So what was it like working in the Treaty of Waitangi Policy Unit at a time where there were no rules, no negotiating principles in terms of treaty settlements, and you were a part of this team at the cutting edge of what the government needed to respond to at the time?
Yeah, it was quite amazing. There were 7 people. They were very dedicated. Alex Frame was the leader and providing the legal overview, and Richard Hill was the historian. Hami Piripi was in there, and then there were some of us who were the juniors in the dogs' bodies doing the research and doing the trips to the archives and writing the replies to the letters and official information requests and so on. And yeah, it was just being built from the ground up. Everybody we were quite zealot-like. We really wanted to build a framework for the first of these modern-day settlements. We'd done history, we knew what had happened in the past, and we knew that the 46 settlement hadn't achieved anything near what it needed to. We knew that the Sim Commission in 1928 was really limited in its terms of reference, and so the 46 settlement was never going to be adequate because it wasn't allowed to look at the treaty. And so we knew that we were coming at it from a whole new angle. And we were trying to, when I first arrived, the process was to inflation index the 46 settlement, and that would take the $15,000 a year and make it $650,000 a year.
But that would never have been enough, understanding the history and the context.
No. So that was the starting point. That was what they were trying to get past Treasury to start with. It was ridiculous now when you look at where we got to, but that was how bad it was.
But you would have sat around the table as a junior, taking the notes, listening to some very privileged thinking, and privileged in terms of, high-level ministers developing their policy thinking as they're gathering information. Is there anything about that time working alongside Doug Graham that you observed? Actually, it wasn't just a formula, it was something else.
Oh, no, well, he was... Well, your father and Doug Graham had a special relationship and a great deal of respect for each other. I think that personal relationship got it over the line. I think Doug Graham was, in retrospect, put a lot of his political capital into the process. I think it was his issue, and he was really, really dedicated to making it happen. And he had to bring all his cabinet colleagues with him. And we know now who he had on side, but at the time we didn't know, because the government departments and the officials were sort of running their machinery and advising their ministers, and the ministers were having their own conversations and doing their own thinking. And quite often the ministers would come back and tell the officials, no, we're not going to do it the way you're advising. We're going to do it the way that we've arrived at. Or we're going to do it the way that I've talked about with Bob or whatever. So you just go and work out how that can happen.
Can you perhaps step us through, after each negotiation, how the Crown regathered itself and re-strategised? Because every conversation I sense there would have been a shifting of approach based on fine-tuning and adjusting according to what people were saying across the table and how they were receiving that information.
Well, we had this A team, B team structure. So we had the Secretary for Justice and a senior official from Treasury, a senior official from Manatu, to Puni Kōkiri then. And then we had the B team, who were the workers, and I was Shane's equivalent. We were taking the notes and doing all the follow-up and running the project management side of things. So after each meeting, I would write up the minutes, I would fax them to Shane. He would confirm at the tainui end that we had recorded it accurately and fairly and that we hadn't left anything out. Once we had an agreed set of minutes, we'd send them to our principals, and the minister would then take the points of agreement and the next steps around to other ministers. And we had cabinet committee structures that we had to go through. So ours was the Treaty of Waitangi Cabinet Committee. We didn't have any delegations at that point, so everything was going to the committee for the first time. Had to go around all the government departments and get signed off by all the government departments. The ones that weren't at the negotiating table, when they saw what was in the paper, would hit the roof sometimes when they saw the implications for their balance sheet or their doc, for example. So we didn't have the structures in place to consult and communicate and develop policy quickly, but we had to, because somebody would see what we'd agreed and phone calls would happen, and people would be just calming the waters, calming things down. So when this is a bit later in the piece, but when all the Crown lands came into the settlement, as much Crown land as we could get onto the settlement package, I think it was Paul Hendry's job was to go and talk to all the chief executives of all the state-owned enterprises and let them know the good news that their property was back on the table. And so we couldn't have talked to them about it at the early stages because it was negotiations in confidence in camera. So we couldn't really bring them along. And so there was a lot of top-down direction, and I think Doug Graham called in a lot of his favours and used his mana to get things across the line there.
So that whole concept of e riro whenua tu me hoki whenua mai and the land for land principle, which formed the great majority of the redress for Waikato. How challenging was it to get to a point of identifying absolutely everything and forming those schedules, that all was, properties and all the lists and all the addresses?
That was the biggest conceptual leap that we had to make as the Crown, understanding what the principle meant and how we could make it real and tangible. And I think we probably spent the first 2 years of the negotiations talking past each other, not really understanding what that meant.
And where was the turning point on that first principle of e riro whenua?
It was in September 1994, 3 months out from the signing of the Heads of Agreement, and we were at Lynn's office in Hamilton, and we were having a meeting on the weekend, and Bob Makuru was there, and the minister was there, and we were all there, and the penny dropped, and our minister said, so you're basically saying everything we own needs to be on the table, and as much of it as we can give back, we have to. And Bob said yes. And then we were like, oh, right, okay. And then we had to go and find out what we owned. I say we being the Crown.
When you observed the interactions, because a lot of it was about the relationship between Doug Graham and RTM, was there a way of communicating or a style of negotiating that underpinned how they built trust with one another?
At that time, they both smoked.
So they had to go out.
They would go out, the two of them, and everyone on the negotiating team would be a little bit jittery, like, what are they going to agree while they're out having a smoke? And that did culminate in the big walk when the relativity clause came back. But they liked each other, I think, and they enjoyed each other's company, and I think going for a smoke was no hardship for them.
Well, let me take you to the big walk.
Yes.
And your recollection of that night here at Hopuhopu when things happened. And can you recall what
I can
happened?
remember that night. Yeah, it was amazing. We'd been busy all day. There'd been the huiaiwi. We'd presented everything. And then we'd left. The Crown had left, and we'd come back to Hopuhopu, and we were waiting. And it was Tainui's job to sell it and get the signatures and get the mandate and come back. And we waited and we waited and we waited and we waited hours and hours and hours. And nobody was going anywhere, and all the lawyers were ready because we knew that there would be movement and things would have to be drafted and so on. And Bob Makuru came back, and there was a report back, and we were all at the table together, and there were some issues tabled, and the two principals sent the advisors away to work together on these particular issues that needed to be devised. And I think Denise had one, Shane had one, and the counterpart Crown people went off and sat in the corners and did the drafting. And there was the wording around the river, and there was wording around different things. And then there was the big walk. And we didn't know what that agenda item was. We just found out when they came back that we were going to need a relativity clause.
And how was that explained to the Crown team?
Well, it was because the fiscal envelope, which the Crown had imposed on its own treaty settlement expenditure, meant that somebody had to go first, and then the relativities would flow. And that was so, it was really unfair on the tribe that went first. And I think Minister Graham could see that it was unfair. And, he's I think it's not out of line to say, I think he's an Anglican and a Rotarian, and, he could see that it was unfair. And I think he also knew that if Robert said it wasn't going to happen without it, we all accepted that this was a bottom line.
And a call was put through to Bill Birch that night?
Yep. And then the lawyers got to drafting. And it took a couple of hours. And Mark O'Regan was doing the drafting. He's left-hander, and I remember his spidery script, writing the clauses up. And Denise was very, very diligent. She was right over all of it. And
then once all of the agreements had been confirmed with the relativity clause and the agreement was signed, what was the feeling?
Well, before that, can I take you back? Yes. Just there's one really special thing was Dame Te Ata was in the kitchen when all of this was going on. The whole day, she was just at different times. She was in the kitchen. You'd see her popping in and out. There was always just this calming presence, and nothing got approved until somebody had gone and had that conversation as well. We knew that conversation had to happen as well. So there was always that final stamp. But then after that came through and we signed, was in the middle of the night, we drove down to Taupere, and there was some karakia on the side of the hill, and the bloody number 1 freight train came through the middle of it, right through the middle of the prayers. And for me, and I've had this conversation with the minister and the Crown officials, that was just the most symbolic example of what Raupatu has done. This main trunk line goes through the middle of the Taupere burial site. How wrong is that? And there we were. So, you know, it was a really special night.
It was a special night. Things have moved on. 30 years now for Waikato. Ngāi Tahu will be approaching a significant milestone as well. Looking back on the whole treaty settlement process, that has now become the approach to address historical grievances, what are you most proud of?
I'm really proud that we got it over the line when we did. There was so much work to do to design a process and educate ministers and educate other officials, educate ourselves. We didn't know anything about the real effect of the Raupatu. We didn't understand the tikanga. We didn't know the geography. But you know, we know a lot more now than we did. And I think, you know, for better or for worse, it got a whole generation of settlements. So, you know, we call it the modern settlements. I don't have any doubt there'll be more settlements in the future. There'll be another wave in 30, 40 years whenever it's needed. But, you know, the 30s settlements, the 46, you know, that was a wave. This was a wave. I felt really proud to be part of it. I think, you know, there was a set of rules at the time of the Sim Commission, and there were a set of rules in the 90s. You know, the rules will have to change for the thing to be durable. We all knew that. But if we hadn't done something within the parameters that we had, you know, where would Tainui be? And it was leadership, I think, and leadership for the whole country. And I truly think that, you know, when you don't need to negotiate, we'll have got there. We're not there yet. But
You're here to celebrate and recognise Shane, and we thank you for that. You had no doubt some special memories and bonds, but is there anything you'd like to share about Shane in particular?
I love Shane. Shane was my equivalent, so I probably talked to Shane every day for 2 years. I faxed him every day. He faxed me. He was so, I have to say, professional. You know, like the minister would say, "Can you talk to Shane and find out what Bob's thinking about such and such?" And I would try. And I would never, you know, he was just so, I don't know, he was just so professional and so smart. So there was one time when Bob had asked for something and Doug Graham had said, "No, that's not going to be possible." And then we hadn't heard, and we were going to have a meeting to discuss, and then we hadn't heard anything from Bob, and the meeting wasn't confirmed, and everybody thought, "Oh no, this is a make or break moment. You know, we've said no to something crucial and the whole thing's going to fall over." And that was one where the minister said, "Well, I can't get a hold of Bob. He's not returning my call." It was before cell phones. He's not answering the phone. Call Shane. So I rang Shane and I said, "Oh, look, you know, everyone's really worried that this thing is going to wobble and the wheels will fall off. Can you please see if you can find Bob and get him to call the minister and confirm that there's no issue?" And a couple of hours later, he did ring, and he'd been at the rugby league.
Oh.
It was a Sunday afternoon, and he wasn't available. And we were all so worried. We just really didn't want the thing to go.
So relationships really matter, and you know, we really appreciate your time and sharing this magical set of events and your recollection about that, because for the tribe, living legacy is the most important thing now, so that the next generation get the benefit of those insights, but also realise that anything worth having has to be worked for.
Yeah.
It doesn't come on a plate. So we appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.